a more casual. It's where we all get to share our ideas. It's different from the conference format where we have one person leading the entire thing and the audience following through. But instead, everyone gets to share their ideas. That's one thing. And for today's session, we're doing a code review. So first, just to set expectations. A code review is not about necessarily finding what was done wrong. It's about looking at what was done, the pros and cons, different approaches, and also sharing the different techniques and reasons why one approach was taken over another. It's meant to be a knowledge sharing session for everyone. Yeah. And the code we'll be reviewing will be from the FlutterCon app. Curious, how many managed to attend FlutterCon last year? Other than Candy? Oh, not so many. Yeah. Such events are really good for networking, good for meeting people face to face. And for the event, we had also created an app. So I made the mistake of updating my Android Studio today, which means I wasn't really able to run the emulator. So we'll just focus on the code specifically. And the link to the code had also been shared. It's on GitHub, but I'll share at the end of the review. Yeah. So when we look at any open source repo, the first thing we need to search for is a README, because a README is a file that gives you instructions. It describes what the project is about and how one can get started with it. It's normally written as Markdown files, and we can see it's capital. It likes to shout, "You better read me right now." So this is what it looks like as code. And yeah, it has links to the designs, links to yeah, how to create an APK. It describes the architecture, and this can be the first step onto trying to understand what a project is doing. If you're ever creating an open source project, the README is a good place to invest quite a bit. It makes it easy for people to also contribute. So from here, we can see a few things that are helpful. We can see in the app architecture, state management has been mentioned. We have a block. We have the folder structure that's to be used. We have the routing that's Go router. And we also have the linked license file, which for most open source projects, it's either an MIT or OpenBSD or such things. Yeah. So given that, whenever we start a Flutter project, the first thing that would run would normally be a main.dat. But looking at the project, there's no main.dat. There's a main underscore development, main production, and main staging. Curious. Does anyone have thoughts on why a project would be split in that sense? Or is this an approach that anyone here has used? Or is everyone part of the vanilla main.dat approach. Mogaya, curious. Oh, sorry, Candy.
Yeah,
It's
I think oh my God, it's kind of rusty, but I'm just trying. I think the reason why we are separating it is to have like different set of builds. Like we have the staging and production. Production is probably the one that we feel like it's confident, so we are able to like publish it to the public. The development is where after maybe you've done some few changes on the staging, then you're able to like take it to the development, and then if you feel like it's a good build, then you push it to production and then now release the application to public.
That's exactly it. So the way I'd put it is, if you've ever used an app, and let's say it's an e-commerce app, then you see one of the products is called test or something. Those are the developers working, but they haven't really split it. So that it can look quite unprofessional. So when we split it this way, and it's usually also tied with different flavors, you have configuration that you're using for development can be an entirely different database from the one that you use in production. You can have stricter security rules in production, while a little looser on development. Yeah, so teams plan it differently, but some have the development being a dev-only server. Then we have the staging, which is the one that quality assurance will use, or internal teams that may want to test it before you have it user-facing. And we have the production side that's now what's actually running. So here we can see an example where we have the licenses being added in production and specific values being configured for production. We have the development side. For the FlutterCon app, it wasn't so different because we didn't set up the different databases, but it's a good practice if you have a normal production website. It's also tied to flavors. Curious, has anyone worked with flavors before or know what flavors are? Yeah. So in Android, you may still want the same code base to have different apps. Let's say, for example, you're building the next Uber. You want an app for the drivers. You want an app for the normal customers. And a lot of that code would be shared. Instead of having two different code bases for the different apps, you can have the flavors, which you can see the configuration over here. Another use for flavors is also, as we were using here for the development, staging, and production. This allows you to install the same app on your phone, just a different, like a dev version and the production version. Yeah, so that's where flavors come to play. So let's go back to our main development of that. Can see the main thing that happens here is we have the configuration, and then we have this function called Bootstrap that creates my app. Going inside Bootstrap, it's basically initializing the things that are normally needed, like a block observer, Firebase, get it, and all the block providers that would be needed. You can see we have the run app function over here. Run app is still the entry point, but having it as a distinct bootstrap function allows you to use the same code in the different configurations. You can see in production, we have bootstrap. Staging, we're using the same function, bootstrap. So that enables code reuse. We'll again go back to bootstrap a little bit later. Let's now go to the main app, which is my app, which is the root widget in our case. So just from this first page, you can see there's quite a bit going on. We have notifications listener being initialized. We can see that the theme is being retrieved from a Hive repository. Hive is a local storage solution. It's one of many. You can use Hive, you can use shared preferences, you can use SemBurst, SQLite, or any of this. There's a lot of freedom on that. You can see that we specify the themes to be used, and it's coming from a class called app_theme. You can see that localizations has been set. So localizations is basically different languages. Say if you want your app to be able to speak English to an English audience, Kiswahili wakienda TZ, French and so on and so forth. You can specify all the localizations. And lastly, we have the router. So there are many ways of handling routing, but for this case, we're using Go router. So I think that would be the most, no, we'll get back to that. When it comes to routing packages, you also have several different options. Go router has been for a while the officially supported routing solution. It's currently in maintenance mode, which means no new features will be coming, but any bugs will be fixed by the Flutter team. However, if you'd like to look at other options, you have something like Autoroute, which is my personal favorite, though it heavily depends on code generation. So that's something to consider. You can look at packages like Beamer, which has a slightly different approach, but experimenting with them would let you know what you're most comfortable with. So just before we look at the roots, let's look at how the theming is done. If you go to this class called app_theme, can see it has some comments over here. It has the general theme for the entire thing and the dark theme. Having all the themes can make your app very, very configurable. You can almost choose the entire look of the app just based on the themes. Now, some people are really good at just selecting the colors directly from code. However, we also have other approaches that can be helpful. Like if you're looking at Flex theme, this is a package by Mike Rydstrom. And from here, you're able to select to customize the theme as you wish, and you're able to see what it will look like from here. Let me show a different look. This is a bluer theme from the purple one. This is a different shade of blue, a more red focused theme, and you can also see what it looks like on light theme. And you're able to also control things like the text field border radius and the default styles. All those can be configured from one place, and using the theme, you can make your entire app consistent. So that's a general good practice. Yeah. Next, let's have a look at the router. So you can see how the router has been organized. You have the different parts over here. And we have the Go router here that specifies the path that's been defined up here, the name, and a builder to the screen that's being opened. This is a good approach. It makes it easy to find out where every path is, and you can see from here every route that can be navigated to. A different approach that some people also use is you can have the path and the builder inside the specific route. So like, let's say if you go into the splash screen, you can have something like static const path is equal to this. And this allows you to do something like the path is splash screen dot path. This is also valid, and it has the advantage of every path being a hard-coded thing. Whenever you need to navigate to a place, you can just think of the name of the screen, then the dot path. The disadvantage is the paths stop being very transparent. You see here, you can easily see that a forward slash is the decision, sign in is forward slash then sign in. This other approach, you'd first have to go into that file to see what the path is. So different teams can use their different choices. Yeah. Then given that, in Go router, unless specified otherwise, a forward slash is the first screen that will be loaded. So in this case, we get to know that the first screen to load would be the decision route. So we can just open that first screen, which would be the splash screen. And we can see what's happening here. Now, we can see the entire thing that's happening is showing the DroidCon logo, after which in our init state, we call the redirect to page function. And going to the redirect to page, we can see that we have a widgets binding.instance add post frame callback, which then navigates to the route that's been given. So the question that comes first is, why would add post frame callback be necessary? I think I would ask Michael why that, just because you're unmuted. Or anyone?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, why we have this add post frame callback?
I don't know, but I think we have Mushira Jr. here. He can give us an answer on that.
Yes, please.
Personally, can you hear me? Personally, I use version 0, like Flutter version navigation 0. something like that. So I don't even. I've
Uh,
never even checked got out. Okay, I checked it. I tried it, but like it to me it sounded more work than like the old version from my experience. But I can
yeah.
understand. Have different views. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It should be known
Yeah,
Moshe is a very big proponent of simplicity. So yeah, he's been preaching that he should use the simplest approach. He's very against state management in general, at least the packages. So yeah, it's also an interesting approach. It should be nice to hear um, when you can point out when things are being more complex than they can be. Yeah. So the reason why we use the post from callback, also, if you write on chat, I might not be able to see it because I'm presenting. I just realized that we had some conversations on the chat.
yeah. I think the White had a suggestion.
Yeah, I've just seen it. Maybe it doesn't push and replace, so you can go back. Not exactly, but yeah, that's quite close. The reason why is when you look at stateful widgets lifecycle, it first needs to be initialized. That's what init state does before going to the other lifecycle methods. So doing any operations that might change some state, like navigation is just changing the state of the current active route. This tends to be an error if done within init state. Although it's not an error that crashes, it's more that it gets reported to the debug console, so it can sometimes be silent. But when you decide to add a post frame callback, it's a function that waits one frame for everything to be initialized, then does the action. So in this case, our navigation. The error would still be faced if you did something like calling set state within the init state. Yeah, it's something that most of the time goes quiet. I haven't found any very negative result.
Kitoka tu nimetoka.
Yeah. Right, Enos. Yeah. So let's go to the next route, which would be the dashboard. So for the dashboard, for those who run the FlutterCon app, you can still download it, I believe, also, if you'd like to see how that looks like. We have a bottom navigation and the different pages. So we have the home page, the feed page, the sessions, and the about. Basically what's happening is we have a list of pages that get initialized in the init state. And we have a function for switching tab that basically changes the specific index to be shown. So that, for example, if you tap on the home page, the index would be 0, showing the first screen. The same thing with the feed, sessions, and about. And lastly, we have the normal scaffold that has a bottom navigation bar and a page view to show the current active page. Then that can be the home page, it can be the feed page, the sessions, and the about. Now, there are different ways to handle it. This directly uses the page controller. You can use in an index stack which has the same behavior. If you're heavily relying on the router, which is my preferred approach, like AutoRouter, they have specific solutions that tie to bottom navigations and tab navigation. GoRouter should also have its shell router, but I haven't really worked with that. So I can't really recommend or dissuade. Curious if anyone has worked with the shell router to say their experience. Anyone except for Mushira Jr.? Okay. Yeah. The reasons why I heavily prefer the router approach is because you can use the URL as a form of source of truth. If you use the URL, it's more important if you work on the web, but on mobile, it also helps during deep linking. It makes it slightly easier to control things like the active page. Generally, just simply the state management side of things. Oh, hey, Mila. Nice to have you join. So, we can now go to the home screen. Now, when you go to the home screen, you can see we have this line. This line is a way of fetching the current internationalization, the locales part, which can be used for changing the different language that your app supports. Then you can see we have the scaffold, the custom app bar, the safe area, single child scroll view, and quite a number of things. Now, one thing about how this screen has been organized, and it's a really good thing that people take a while to learn. You can see we have like, this is an entire widget, search by widget. We have a speaker card. We have an organizer's card. It's basically, widgets have been broken down into more manageable areas so that they're easier to read. So that's a very good practice. One other thing, we can see the text styling is dependent on the theme. This is also good for consistency because it allows you to be able to control the entire look of the app just from the theme. We also have here where we call this function getTheme that returns a Boolean and the color scheme. This approach is called pattern matching, where we're just selecting the variable that we want from the record that's returned from getTheme, which is here. So the Boolean is whether the app is in light mode, and the color scheme also just gotten directly from the theme. Yeah. Before diving further into the home screen, we can see for consistency, the feed screen is also organized similarly. You have the scaffold, you have the internationalization, there's light mode and the color scheme, and again, all the widgets that would be required. The same happens for the session screen. You can see the consistency. Consistency is really good when trying to understand a code base. So always try to at least reuse the same approach over and over. It pays dividends as a project goes on. And the same for the about screen. So just before continuing, diving deeper into the home screen, we can also see the sign in and the sign up. So for that, I'll just come here. And you can see we have the block listeners, then the scaffold, the block consumer. Just skimming through, then you're going to go into detail. And you can see we have a function here for signing in with Google. Now, because we're using block for this project, we have the concept of qubits and the concept of blocks. In general, you never want to call everything from the UI. That becomes really, really hard to manage, especially as the project becomes bigger. A good approach is usually to separate your app into 3 different layers. There can be more, but 3 is the simpler one. You have the UI side, that's where we write the widgets. You have the business logic side of the blocks. This can be your view models, can be your blocks, can be your river pod providers. So here's an example with a block where you have the Google sign-in qubit. Then we also have a data layer. So this is where you interact with external data. So it can be local storage, it can be your server. So in our case, we have repositories like the auth repository, which has the methods like ghost signing, because diversity is important. We have sign in with Google. You have the sign in with token, and you have the logout function. All this, in general, you'd want your UI to interact with your business logic layer and your business logic layer to interact with your repository. It can get tricky if you have the layers intermingling. So this is a relatively clean approach to separating it. Now, coming to how we have it here, you can see we have the logo and the sign in button, which when clicked calls the sign in with Google button, Google function, which is the business logic side, which sets it to a loading, does the sign in, and if it's successful, you are loaded with a token. Otherwise, if it's an error, you get into an error state and you probably want to communicate that error. That's how you pass in the message. And coming back, there's the listener above. You can see here, we have the snack bar that shows the message in case of, say, an error. If it's loaded, we social sign in, then you have the social sign in listener, which again, if it's an error, we show the message. Otherwise, we go back to the splash, which now takes us to the dashboard. This is a perfectly valid approach, though using a listener may sometimes make code a little bit harder to read. A different approach is collocation. You can have everything relating to signing in be called within the onPressed of the function. So it would be possible to have a function like onPressed and have it called here in the onLongPress and in the button sign in here in this onPressed. That can sometimes make it easier for to read your code, just because, like in this case, we had to switch between reading what's happening inside this sign in with Google and going back to the listener. Yeah, it's just slightly less mental effort. With experience, it becomes easier to select when to use a listener versus when to use collocation. Both work the same, but yeah, you can easily choose which approach you want to go with. So just before we dive into the home screen a little bit deeper, do we have any questions so far?
have a question. So
Yeah.
for the ones that I know you haven't run the application just yet, but if somebody wants to run the app and you go to your terminal and just say Flutter run, why is it doesn't allow to, why doesn't it run?
Good question. So, first, to run the app, we have the instructions that are set. If you just read the README, you'll see that it first asks you to clone, but if you're already at the point of running, you've already cloned from GitHub. Then ensuring you have the latest Flutter. You need to run Flutter pub-get to get all the dependencies. Oops. Then, because we use Freezed in this project to generate the models, Freezed requires code generation. The version that you download from GitHub does not have all the files that would be required. So that's why we run this build runner to generate the files that would be needed. After which, another thing, if you remember how we started the code review, we talked about how there's no main.dat, but you have the main development, production, and staging. Flutter does not know about this. By default, Flutter will search for main.dat. So when you run this command on the terminal, we specify the target, so Flutter knows which file specifically to run, which would be lib/main_production for the prod environment, the development one, and the staging one. So if you follow these instructions, it should run unless Gradle is your enemy, which has been mine today. Yeah, but that is the experience. Do we have any other question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I have seen a similar thing that I'm always doing. So this is in regards to mixing set state and also with the state management. So like the one which you have used on the navigation, you could see while switching tabs, you're updating your state with set state. So my question comes in, because I always do that. So I want to confirm if I'm lazy or it is okay, it's a good principle. So in the scenario that sometimes I'm also in dilemma, because if you have started, let's say you're using Qubit, you're using block, instead of using the normal set state, should you maintain like using, even if you can be able to create a block for maintaining also switching between different tabs, or using set state is fine?
Using set state is totally fine. Okay, block uses streams in the background, but the general effect is still towards set state. So I'd say use the one that makes sense in the scenario. Set state gets cumbersome when you want to share between different widgets or screens and such. Block may get cumbersome if you're using it for every small piece of state within a screen. It can end up becoming more work to maintain than the set state approach. Yeah. So let's go to the home screen again. And because of time, we won't last so much.
Before you continue, I have a question. Okay, how I do my code, I'm used to having a folder for models, another folder for views, and another folder for controllers. And I'm looking at the code, seeing that we don't have such. Is my way advantageous, or is there anything that I'm doing that is, or is there anything that you're doing that is better than how I do it my way?
Do you find it easy to work with?
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. The approaches are different. We have the feature first. Oh, yes, Mila.
Awesome. Thank you for allowing me to speak. So maybe just to respond to his his query. For this particular code base, one thing that must be understood is context. Context is key here. So the project was instantiated by somebody else, and then now they went with the approach of clean architecture, which has a different way of placing models. So the approach of having like a models folder, I do use it as well in some projects because it's much easier for like small apps. So here it depends on just perspective because it was initialized by somebody else who done the clean architecture approach, which has a particular way of putting in models. The beauty about that the beauty about that is that because you can move around files very easily, it is easy to basically it's easy to basically like refactor. So as long as the style remains consistent, that is what matters most. So here I was like while doing code reviews, I was aiming to ensure that things are consistent for the sake of honoring the work of the person that had initialized the project using a clean architecture. Yeah.
Yep. That's a very good point. Consistency is the most important thing. Yeah. So I will now go to the home screen and I'll use let's say the search bar as an example, as something that we can look at as an example. So how it's set, we have the search bar widget, which has a debounce timer. It has a search controller, a function for when on search changed, and you can see it calls a search qubit. And when it comes to the build, we have a function for building the search bar and for showing the search results. Now, some people are very against using functions just because of let's say using stateless or stateful widgets is slightly more performant than using functions. But I'd say this is perfectly fine. The argument towards performance, people tend to over-optimize. And there's a saying that premature optimization is the root of all evil. You never want to really optimize without knowing what you're really optimizing for. So measurement comes in there. You can find that you're making your code slightly harder to read and gaining really nothing from it. But that being said, we have the build search bar, which has the container and a row with the search icon, the text field, and an icon button to clear the search field. We have the search results. That's basically listening to the search qubit. And based on the results, on the state of the search qubit, we build the results. The search results list is just a list view builder, which has the result item, which is basically a list style with cards, and a function for what happens if you click on one of the items you searched for. So let's go inside the build search results. Let's see. The search qubit, sorry. So when we look at the search qubit, it basically has a reliance on the DB repository. So as we mentioned earlier, it's good to have the different layers. The repository is the one that's actually doing the loading of the results, and the block can do the categorizing or any of the transformations if needed. And it's the block that shares with the UI. So if we decided to go into the DB repository, we can see that it uses ISA, another option for local storage. When you're setting up ISA, you have to specify the different schemas, and these are all the functions that can be there. So the project took an offline first approach. After you've downloaded everything, they're stored locally, so that allows you to also work even when you're out of internet. That's a good practice for general good user experience, because internet connection can be slow. It can have lots of disruptions, so it's always good to think of a local storage thing. Yeah, so from there you'll be able to get from your query all the results, and they're mapped into the different categories. So you have the sessions, the speakers, and the individual organizers. You can also see this small dash trick that uses the 3 dots. It's called the cascade operator. It's useful if you want to iterate through every element in a certain list and put it within this particular list. Yeah. I can see Daniel Mutai. Do you want to mention something? Okay. So, one thing when you're looking at the search state, we have this annotation, the @freezed, and use the $ and underscore. Freezed is a package that helps you when generating models, especially when you want to create the different fields. I would highly suggest that if you're working on any project, to avoid writing your own data classes. By data class, I mean with the to map or from map or the to JSON. The options like freezed, or we have that mappable, which help with that. And the reason why I'd propose this over the manual approach, the manual approach can be error prone. For example, a small typo can be a very difficult bug to detect. Can be when you need to make changes, especially for a really big class, can be quite tedious. And there's always that day that you'll be tired. Now, that's it. I'd propose using either phrased or that mappable, or there's an extension for VS Code. I don't know if there's one for Android Studio or any of your IDE of choice. Yeah. There's also AI, but that is slightly unreliable. Sometimes it hallucinates, and it might be quite difficult to figure out. Yeah, so that's basically how search works. We also have a sessions card. In the sessions card, you can see again the consistency comes to play. You have the internationalization, you have the color scheme and the is light mode. Then you have this auto size text. Now, auto size text is useful because text can look quite different from, let's say, an iPad screen versus a phone screen. So it's basically based on responsiveness. It's always good to think of being responsive for different reasons. One, many different devices will be used to access any app that you're working on. Even if you're to limit it to phones, the phones themselves have different sizes. You have some very small ones, some large ones, and it's good to think of them. Yeah. Is there a way to hide the generated files from the files section for a project with too many models? Yes, you can hide it. I can't remember the approach. But it is possible to hide all the freezed or JSON annotation generated files. Okay, then going through, we have this check, then still using the theme to specify the color of something. This is a good approach because by using the theme colors class, if we ever decided that we no longer want Fluttercon to be blue, we want it to be green, we'll just change it from the theme, and from there, every part of the app will be automatically updated. Yeah, then we also have more dependence on the theme. Now, we also have the size box. One thing that I've also seen being done is instead of specifying a size like 16 in this case, it's also possible to create a class and have it as constants. Like from the web world, we have the XS for extra small, small, medium, large, and so on. You're also able to set up such a thing. It's also possible to pass it through a theme using a theme extension if you'd like to have different spacings. So yeah, all those are valid approaches. And you can see we again depend on a block for the specific sessions. The block is called the fetch session qubit, which I can just slightly dive into. And you can see it depends on two things: the API repository for server requests and the database repository for local requests. So when we fetch sessions, we first try to get the local sessions. If they don't really exist, we go for the network. And after getting them from the network, we save it to the database so that our next fetch would have things locally stored. Then we can also have the filter, and then the block emits it so that it can be used from the UI side. Now, if you go to the function called network fetch, you can see we're basically calling the API repositories method, then we persist it locally. So going to the API repository, you can see we have a network utils, which I can go to. Now, network utils is a helper class that was meant for things that are done frequently. So you can see, for example, when getting a HTTP client, it initializes DO with all the options that are necessary. It adds the interceptors. Interceptors are basically things that intercept. They come between a request and before it goes out or before you get the response. So this one, for example, adds a header for authorization. And if it's in debug mode, it also adds a logger to log the entire request that's happening. Now, if you look at the class, it's perfectly fine. It's a singleton, so that's why we have this internal constructor. And that's really being called by the normal constructor. The only problem with going with the singleton approach is it makes it quite difficult to test or mock it out. This isn't inherently bad. Testing would be an entire topic for a different day, in that there are times when testing becomes helpful. There are times when it becomes a little more work, but it's just good to know that if you go with a singleton approach, you make testing slightly harder. Now, the one thing with singletons is they're perfectly valid if, let's say, they're calling functions and so on, but they are very dangerous if you have mutable state. Mutable state is state that changes frequently. Like you can have a function for modifying the current state. The reason why it becomes dangerous if you're using a singleton is that state can start being changed from many different places within the app, and it becomes really difficult to debug what's causing a change. That can be especially true if you're working with a team and have a different developer decide to change it at one point that you're not aware of. So that's something to know. But yeah. Mm. It's basically you can see that by using the network util class in all our network requests, we end up having the same configuration for DO with all the interceptors added, and no need to really repeat ourselves. It's the dry code principle. And also the consistency helps with understanding how the code works. Now, one interesting approach is this try, catch, then rethrow. There are different approaches for dealing with errors. One is exceptions, which are typically how that goes about it. So like in this case, you can catch, you can log what the error has been. Then when you rethrow, you have to catch it on the block side or on the UI and use that to show the error. The other approach is to use a more functional style with the class called either. So it has a return type that's either a failure or the expected result. So you always have to use, okay, it forces you to handle errors with that approach. My personal experience has been, it also leads to a lot of nesting, which sometimes makes the code a little bit harder to read. But these are the different approaches that you can look at for your different code bases. Yeah. So far, any comments, any questions?
So I had a question. So
Yeah.
in regards to the implementation that we have used on Dio, we have a single method that calls. So what will happen in a scenario like you have let's say a financial app that is more security sensitive, and where the token needs to, maybe after a certain duration, a new token is provided. So how will you handle such a scenario with the implementation that you have showcased?
Yeah. One thing, first, you always want to make sure that the expiry of a token happens on the backend. You never really want to trust a client for that. Like client, I mean the UI side, the app side. Then given that, the tokens can have the expiry times. So like if you're using a JWT token, you can have a check for if it's expired. In that case, log a person out directly. So you have a bit of freedom with that. But the main thing is make sure any extremely sensitive item like a token, the management of it is done through the server.
So, in regards of follow-up in regards to that, so my question was, if even let's say the expiration must be handled, there's the duration which the token takes. And then maybe let's say you're making a request in terms of user experience. So with the method that you have showcased, can it be able like to do a refresh on the same, calling a new get client and be able to update the token so that you can be able to have a valid token and the user can continue without noticing either the app is down or there are some issues with the authorization?
Yeah. Oh, Mila, yeah.
Thank you. So real quick concerning refreshing tokens. So some apps do refresh tokens, others you have to maybe sign out and sign like again. So depending on the refresh, what can happen is that you have basically the interceptor. So you can make an interceptor which checks if the token is valid. If it's not, it pings, because normally the API will provide an endpoint to you give the you're given like two tokens. Token one is the auth token, then number two is the refresh token. So you'll have an API which you provide the access token to receive the refresh token to receive the new token. Then you persist it in Hive again, and then allow the interceptor to allow the request to continue running, and then the what the network utility will pick up the new token in the device. So that is one approach. Approach number two, where you need now to like log out, because some apps require that, e.g. banking apps, you must log out and then log back in for the sake of security. So for that one, what you can do is that in the if you go to app.dat, which has the material app.router, the router file. In this particular project, we were using Hive. Hive has something called Hive. There's a widget called Value Listenable Builder, which like emits a. Okay, let me share my screen just for like 1 second, and then to showcase this. I hope it's okay.
Yep.
Where are you? Where's the screen share? Okay, there it is. Oh my share. Okay, I have to like drop off Zoom to share the screen. But basically what happens is that you can wrap the material app.router widget that is in the app.dat file. You can wrap it with a very listenable builder, and then it's listening to the Hive box. Maybe you can have like a different Hive box just for the token, and then each time when the values in the box change, it will run the builder method again, and then in that builder method you check if the user is logged out. This is if the token is missing. If it's missing, then you route the user to the login page. And then how you look at a user is that because the app requires a token, if it's null, no, if the token had expired, then you delete it from Hive, and then the interceptor will pick up that the token is missing to go ahead and navigate you to the login page. So basically, so that's one approach. Value small builder, listen to the Hive box. The other approach that you can try again is you can have a global block or something, a global block, a global qubit, whose work is merely to listen to the token, and then you wrap it on the material widget so that it's available across the entire app. And then when the token has expired, you can emit something, and then it routes you to the login page. Yeah. Maybe I can send like a sample of this when I do have time, but yeah, that's basically it. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Mila. Mogaya, I can see your hand is raised.
Oh yeah. I wanted to explain about the token and the refresh token, but I think Mila has done it justice. He has actually outdid my explanation. I think I just an add-on, like we normally have the refresh token with a longer expiry date than like the token itself. So like you can set the refresh token to expire in a day's time or like in 5 hours, and then you have the token expire in like 30 minutes. Yes. So and then you add what Mila said. Yes.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. It looks like this is a very interesting topic. So I think we can have a...
Excuse.
Sorry?
Excuse. I don't know how someone is had on Zoom. So what I just wanted to say on that part, like for sessions, I think I don't know. I feel like there's a complication. So for me, I was like, you can just even tell the AI to create a function that stores something to shared preferences with a date of like last login, and then whenever you are whenever you are creating a request, then it's simple. You check that if it says if it will return like a true or false. It checks the current time, the last time you logged in. It returns true or false. If it's like false, you have not logged in, then there's a way you can like put it's called a navigation what it's called a navigation key on your material app. I hope everyone gets that, right? So
Yeah.
that you can do anything. Like you can like clear the screen so then stack and direct to the sign up screen or whatever you need. Also, if it's that thing for like refreshing, if it's false, then just call the login, the request token again in the network header or whatever. I think that's very simple, according to me. Also, I think the very reasonable thing, which Miller said, I think that's an inbuilt Flutter function. It's not a Hive thing. Actually, I use that all the time. So, can I comment on something else?
Yeah, sure.
So the other part I think is okay, on code structure. Someone had asked about code structure, and I would say, I think first of all, Flutter doesn't have that MVC because according to me, MVC is when the controller is literally controlling what happens. So like if you are using .NET, you know what's really a controller. Like once you hit, like you create a network request, the controller says, this is where you go, either you are logged in, either you are logged. But for him, this one, you can just call it controller, service, repository. I think however you call it, I would say the best thing is just to say, this is a business logic. This is the DTUs or the models. This is the UI or the views. Yeah, just I think that's the simplest. Like, don't like maybe try to fit in someone else's thinking or whatever. I mean, structure. That's what I would say. For state management, and someone said something about using like how to block or anything else. In this sense, all of them use just set state. Just don't worry about it. So like set state is just, it's not bad. It's just, I think all the others are just a nice wrappers of set state. That's why you shouldn't even fear that. So then the search issue. This is something I think we had talked with in the group some long. This is the last thing actually. I'm not saying something else. So this is something we had talked on the group a couple of some months ago. So and I think I came out to find out. I think we kind of lock ourselves into something that sometimes even does not exist. So if you are searching, and especially if the rest of the data is there, you are just playing around with the UI. So if there's like a search filter there, all text editors in Flutter has like you can add an event listener. So you just need to set state and filter the risks down there using where like you can add a query and then set state. It will rebuild the same way it will rebuild if you used anything else like the rebuild, and especially when someone you see like you have a search box up there and there's a risk, and someone like it's a little bit tedious for someone to click and open a new view or whatever something. So I think it's just around playing around with the UI. That's it.
Yeah. So as I said, Mushira is the prophet for simplicity, and it's a very good philosophy to have. The part that I disagree occasionally is when I feel like simplicity comes at the expense of functionality. To use an example is just as an example, we can, it depends on your specific usage. For example, for the search field, right now, it might make sense because we have all the data within the list view also on the below. To use the filter on the UI as he was mentioning. But there are times when you don't have all the data client side. Say, for example, if you're implementing an API like the GitHub API, it allows for search, but you don't have all the data with you. And there comes important things like debouncing, which is you don't want to search immediately a person has typed. You want to give some delay so that you don't have, let's say if you have a quota for your API and so on, it might make sense to look into these other approaches. You can also roll out your solution manually, but that also heavily depends on how much trust you have in yourself as a developer. A very common approach would have had many people try to use it. Many people point out gotchas. So it tends to also be a little bit safer. So it's on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, not by the way, I think sometimes people get me wrong. I said if you have the data there, like okay, it's not applicable 100%, but personally, I think in most of the cases, or 90%, we kind of complicate unnecessarily. But noted.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Then I think we've been here for a while, so I'd like to pause the code review session. Wondering if anyone has any thoughts on how the session has been before we close it up and call it a night. Anyone? Yeah, so thank you all for coming. It's been really nice. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I think just an overview of how the session has been. I think it's been insightful, seeing or getting comments from everyone, getting ideas from like different perspective. It's really enlightening, especially the likes of Mushira. I think I've gotten some new things there about just going with Flutter instead of overcomplicating if there's no need. Then also the likes of Mila, I think insightful highlights, especially on the refresh, on how to handle the refresh tokens and everything. So yeah, I think from my end, it's been insightful. Thank you all. Thank you for organizers for planning this. And I'd want to encourage you to propose that we have more of these sessions. Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
thanks for sharing that. Yeah, so thanks everyone. If anyone has a question that pops up later, you can also just pop it up within the WhatsApp group, and yeah, it will be revisited. I've seen the session's topic is a hot one, so we'd probably revisit in more depth with time. Yeah, so for now, everyone have a great night, and thanks so much for coming.